when I told people that I was coming out here to spend some time with you, it kind of pisses me off because it's like I know what it's like now to be, and this is going to make me sound horrible, but I know what it's like to be like maybe kind of like a homely girl standing next to like the prom queen because everybody is like, Randy's the best guy ever. He's my favorite. He's so humble.
Oh my goodness.
Like you could turn over every stone in the archery industry or the hunting industry as a whole, and I don't think you'd find a person to say anything bad about you. It kind of drives me nuts because I can find somebody who hates me like every day.
Yeah, my emails are just right over there, Tony. If you want me to, I got a whole folder full of them. I got guys who the one that always cracks me up is the guy's going to come whoop my ass.
Of course.
And he probably could, but
well, over what?
You name it.
Yeah.
You know, what color of the collar my dog had when he was 14 or something. It's funny stuff.
I'll tell you what, man, I'm a big fan of the Second Amendment. I love guns.
Oh.
I think we should all own a lot of them. I think we should absolutely know how to use them. But when I get reader responses sometimes or people reach out to me, every once in a while I'm like, maybe that's the guy who shouldn't own a gun. Like maybe I'm not 100% on board with everybody because some of the stuff that I see people get mad about, I'm like, oh, what's going on in your life, man? It's weird, huh?
There's people out there, and that's part of, you know, everything we've done, we've converted 100% to the digital space. Whether it's podcasts, whether it's YouTube, Amazon, forums, and you make yourself very accessible that way. I don't know how people aren't accessible if they have those kind of platforms. Maybe I know I'm below average, so that's probably why I haven't figured out how to not allow people to get a hold of me. But it's one of the, I guess, if there is a negative that sometimes comes with all the benefits and positives of what we do, I'll take that all day, every day.
Yeah, it's a first world problem, right? Yeah, I mean, I'm so successful that some people are pricks and they come threaten to beat me up. You know, like, of my hundreds of thousands of admirers, there's a couple people who don't like me. You know, like but it's a weird thing, right? Because a lot of the people who like what you're doing, you probably don't hear from. You just don't, right? Probably. And you do hear some, and that's awesome. But the negative ones always stick.
Yeah,
like you're always like that's the one that ruins your day. You could get 100 positive ones. You get that negative one, you're like, I hate that guy. That guy sucks.
No, my wife reminds me of that. Is why do you focus on that one negative one you got this week when you had all these other emails? I'm like, good point. That's why you're smart and I'm not, honey.
They're good at grounding you. My wife will. She'll go the same way too, and her tact is always, would you trade places with them? And probably not. No, and she's got experience as a physical therapist. She worked in chronic pain clinics, and she's dealt with everybody from all kinds of injuries. Obviously, all kinds of walks of life. All kinds of people who are trying to game it for disability or. Subscription or prescriptions to whatever, painkillers or so she's pretty level-headed about it. She's always like, would you trade places with these people? Like you get mad at them for whatever they're doing, but you wouldn't trade places with them. So you're just better off just letting it go.
No, for me, I wake up every day and I say, you know what? I was born in the best country in the world. I get to go and do something I love every day. What would I'd be embarrassed to complain. I would feel guilty to think that I have something to complain about. And so I'll go into the local coffee shop here and they're like, how you doing today, Randy? I'm perfect. And after a while, people say, you're perfect every day. I'm like, yeah, I know. It's free and it's a state of mind, Why not be perfect? It doesn't do any good to go up to someone else and say, yeah, I really, I just sucked today, man. What a God. That's just not
worth it.
Who I am. And that's kind of how I go through my life is, every day is a great day. And the other thing I tell people is they'll say, have a good day. I'm like, oh, I can guarantee you I will. I'm 54 years old. I've never had a bad day in my life, and I'm not going to start the habit like that at this point in my life. So
you're like the 54-year-old version of a black lab. Like, my dog, my black lab has never had a bad day in her life.
No.
She's had some days that were better than others, but the bar was set so high that she's like, every day is awesome, buddy. Like, every day we wake up, let's just go do something cool. You going to throw that for me? That is awesome. You going to pet me? Thank you. It's great.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about my life of how it's structured, I had, and I'm not much of a CPA anymore. I'm really bad at it. I on purpose, I've tried to get fired from the CPA world, and I'm succeeding marginally. But I've had tax season. My wife is a walleye fishing fanatic, so the rest of after April 15th, all we did was walleye fish, and then I have hunting season. If I were to complain, kick me in the head. hit me with a lead pipe or something. I have nothing to complain about.
Yep.
So, and you decided to have me on your podcast. That's even a better day. I can ruin your brand in one episode.
Well, nobody's paying attention to what we're doing anyway. You can say whatever you want.
Okay. Well, I mean, I'm a little bit worried that you're filming this podcast because I just got out of the muskrat marsh. If I look like I was out trapping muskrats this morning, it's because I was.
Like I said, we don't have an audience. It doesn't matter anyway. Nobody cares. We can do whatever we want. We can talk about anything you want. But yeah, man, I wanted to get you on. So this is the interesting thing. When you do what we do, right? You think it's kind of like going on a hunt. If I go on a mule deer hunt, I'm thinking first, like, I want to go shoot a mule deer. But then you start figuring out all the other stuff around it, and you follow all these paths. And we were just talking before we started this about how we have ADD, or at least I do, and you know, shiny butterflies and all the stuff distracts you. But this kind of stuff is interesting because I think, people will say, well, ask Randy about elk or ask him about mule deer. And we'll get into that stuff, but you always just find these random things to talk about that aren't, like, the industry has been structured around how do I take somebody from point A, which is not having a dead animal, to point B, which is having a dead animal.
Right.
And there's a place for that. There's a market for that where, like, there are people out there who are like, just tell me what's the secret to killing a big buck. Right. And those are the people that are going out and they're buying the scents and the lures and the decoys and everything else every year. But the reality is, like, maybe the reason we don't go that way as much is because we know there's no secret.
Right.
Like, there's nothing that I'm going to say or you're going to say that's probably going to be the total reason why anybody goes out and finds success.
Right.
If you measure it that way, if you measure it by a short blood trail and high fives, right?
Yeah.
But it's what I'm more interested in, and that's why I want to start this podcast. I'm more interested in your strategy for just enjoying it the most out there. And like how, because I kind of know, knowing you, I kind of know where you go with it. And, I've watched your shows, I've seen what you do. And I look at it and I'm like, Randy thinks the way I do, kind of where it's like the first way to enjoy this is to put myself in a position where I'm doing something other people aren't. Mm-hmm. Like you gotta find something, some way to be doing what your competition isn't doing, right?
Yeah. Or at least it's got to be something you're passionate about. Yeah. Because that comes across. I think anyhow. If you and I are in a wonderful position where we could probably go do all the cool things, the dream thing, the exotic thing. For me, I want to go do what's fun.
Yep.
And people are like, well, why do you go muskrat trapping? Because it's just fun. Usually you got to get outside the boundaries of legality and morality to have that kind of fun. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that's for me. That's that's what drives all my content. It's got to be fun.
Yep. But when I watch what you're doing, mm-hmm. I know you're doing that because I know your grouse thing, I know your muskrat thing, and I'm the same way. Like just to use fishing as an example, I found a spot last year at the lake that we go to where there's current, there's a couple rivers coming in, going out, inlets, outlets. And I found one spot that had one down tree, and the big crappies and the sunfish were stacked on there. And there was, there were largemouth that would cruise in there, or you'd catch some rock bass or whatever. But mm-hmm. you could go there, and there was this spot, and it was so good. It was so much fun to just go take, you take crappie minnows, and you'd take a thing of night crawlers, and I would take kids. I mean, I was like, finally, the guy who lives there walked down. He's like, "Hey, man, like, can you just lay off of them a little bit?" And I'm like, I'm like, we're letting most of them go, and he's like, "You've been here for like 6 weeks in a row, like just like, are you guiding? What's going on?" I'm like, it's just so fun, and I'm not even catching them most of the time. I'm like, I got to find somebody to take out there, and that's what I love about where we go. There's always kids, whether it's mine or there's these little, depending on who's up there at that time, there'll be these boys that are like 8 to 12 years old, and they just want to catch a big smallmouth, and they want to go throw a topwater, and they're all competitive. So I always have somebody in my boat winging something around, but it's just fun, and it's just it's like a no pressure, just whatever kind of thing.
Yeah, for me this has just been my approach to all things in life, is that I don't take myself too seriously. I remember where I came from and how I grew up. It's like, my dad was a broke down logger, and he's like, "Son, you're the worst logger I've ever met. I can't afford to pay for college, but I suggest you figure it out."
Yep.
And so I did think back about, if you would have told me growing up in Big Falls, Minnesota, that I would have the life I have today, my mind couldn't even go there. I could not envision living in such an amazing place, having all that has come my way, and surrounded by so many fun and supportive people. If you could, I could not have believed that.
Yep.
So
I know I'm the same way. My wife does a good job of reminding me of that, but I also have to remember that, like, I would never, if you had asked 25-year-old Tony what the future had in store, there's no way. Yeah. I mean, I couldn't even have come close to it. I love what you mentioned about taking yourself too seriously, because you and I have gone down that rabbit hole before, and I always like to remind myself of that. I always, we know the same people in the industry, and everybody's been around people who, really believe they're something special. Mm-hmm. And I always look at those people, and I always think in my head, I'm like, at some point in your adult life, you've pooped your pants. Like, at some point, like you go to the gym and you see the most beautiful woman in the world. I say that because I have. And so.
Oh, I didn't expect that, but okay, let's continue.
So, like, I just, in the hunting industry, you go to the gym, you see this beautiful woman who's, she's all made up, she's gorgeous, whatever. She's strutting around like she knows it. I'm like, at some point, you pooped your pants, even if it was just a little bit. Even if it wasn't like a full on, I know like somewhere you've done that, and that brings you right down to my level. So don't walk around like you're so special. So,
well, when it comes to our content and hunting, and a lot of people follow our stuff because I'm blessed. I get to do a lot of elk hunting. I live in a great place for elk hunting. I always remind people that I hunted elk. I hunted so hard for 6 years. My first 6 seasons, I did not kill an elk. Mm-hmm. I didn't even fire a shot at an elk for 6 years. That's how below average I am. But I just stuck with it and said, somehow, some way, I'm going to figure this out. And now I'm really thankful for all those failures I had in those 6 years, because that's what I learned from.
Yep.
And I don't want to hold out to the world that, oh, yeah, Randy Newberg, if you mail him an elk tag, you may as well just get the freezer ready. No, I'm still not very good at it. But I try really hard, and I get to go to a lot of places, different season types, different weapon types, different terrains, different habitats. So you go there, and you get to experiment a lot. And from those experiments, you learn a few things. That's the only thing I can attribute any elk hanging on my wall or in my freezer. Just I lucked out and worked hard enough.
Well, I know you're being humble there, because I know that you have a system for it. But what I think is such a good point there is that when you say that you work 6 years, don't even fire a shot, people see you, they see this life of Randy boiled down to what you're presenting out there. And you like, I know when you go out and film a day and you don't see any elk, that's on the cutting room floor, right? Or you might in passing talk about it, but it doesn't stick with the audience.
Right.
But I think the main point there that people should take away from it is how hard it actually is. Like that's why I'm such a I'm like an elk education geek because I'm so bad at it. Like, you want to talk about bad? Like, I've only hunted elk a few times. I've been around them some. I have no confidence, and I can look at maps, I can find meadows and benches and all this stuff, and I get in there and I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And so whenever I'm around anybody who's had success, I'm always like, so what's going on? How are you doing it? And it's like, you always hear that, right? You always hear, like, it is so much more difficult than it's presented. And I'm talking from the perspective of, over the counter stuff, like you are, where anybody can get an elk hunt. Very few people will get an elk.
Right.
And that's what you learn from that. And I think what you said about, the 6 years of struggling, I think that is what matters so much. I mean, I see that with whitetail hunters all the time, where, I know it's easy to think that whitetail hunting is easy, but what kind of whitetail hunting are you talking about?
Right.
Because it varies so much, right?
Yeah.
And so we have this perception, especially now with social media, where, you pull up your Instagram feed and you can look at 200-inch bucks all day long.
Yep.
And it's like, holy cow, everybody's killing deer that we didn't even think were possible like 15 years ago. And they're not. Like, they're just not. They're so rare. And I would love to know, the actual success rate on, like, public land elk, bow, gun, whatever. I would also like to know, one stat that I would give anything to have is, like, what percentage of bow hunters are killing, like, 130-inch plus whitetails with any level of consistency?
Right.
Let's say once every 3 years. I mean, I think the number would be so low it would blow people's minds.
Yeah. Oh, I think you're exactly right. And I think in the elk world, well, in Montana, I think our elk success rate bounces between 12 and 15%. And
that's statewide, right?
That's statewide.
Yeah.
And so that's counting some places where it's I don't want to say a slam dunk, but it's exclusive access. It's undisturbed elk.
Yep.
They get thrown in that mix. So if you took just the do-it-yourself public land slice of that pie, it's going to be somewhere south of that 12 to 15%.
Yeah.
So people who are doing that on a consistent basis, I'm all ears when they're talking. Yeah. I'm I'm not broadcasting. I'm receiving at that point when I'm around those kind of people. And if all of us who produce content, I always worry about, are we making an image or building an image that is so unrealistic that it discourages some people? And that's why I try to be as just real about who I am and how much I struggle and why we do episodes where we didn't get anything. I mean, last year, me and my uncle go to New Mexico. Like a lot of people, we run into a full moon and 90-degree weather, archery, elk hunting. And I don't care who you are.
Yep.
We had our hands full trying to even find elk and have encounters. And I thought, well, this is going to be an absolute belly flop here. This is not going to be good. And people watched it, and the comments were, thanks so much for showing that. Because it wasn't until the last 2 days that we really started getting into elk. And as I read the comments, it becomes very obvious that they appreciate the fact that we made a story about what every hunter faces.
Yep.
And some content producers, those ones are, like you said, going to go to the cutting room floor. We throw them out there because I don't have any persona that I'm really worried about. I mean, when you grow up, slow, you're not a good athlete, you're just average student. I've never had really a persona I was that worried about keeping up.
Yeah.
So
when you're only an inch off the ground, you don't have to, you're not worried about falling, right?
Exactly. So for me, all the content we produce, I'm very cognizant of that fact. And that's why you'll see a lot of our content is days where we're not trying to run away from a stampede of elk that are coming our way. That's not how it works. And for those of you who watch content where it seems that way, well, that's probably not reflective of the average elk hunting experience.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, watching a guy with your experience do it is not reflective of the average experience anyway. But then you take it to that level and you put them on a ranch that's, the bulls have a $15,000 price tag on their heads, and you get into a different world. But I think what's so interesting is just to stick with elk is, I'm all ears too. If somebody starts talking and they're consistent and they go state to state and they're not doing the, buy your way into an amazing property. Mm-hmm. The thing that I find so consistent typically is time. And it's like, I'll never forget, I talked to Dan Evans from Trophy, who's used to own Trophy Taker, and Dan Evans is a big bull killing machine.
Yep.
And he said, I hunt 3 states every year, and I give myself 2 weeks in this state, 2 weeks in this state, 2 weeks in this state. And he was, there's a lot more to it than that, but he was giving himself 2 full weeks,
right?
And that's a lot. Think about you think about hiking into the Elk Mountains. We were joking this morning. I was asking you what elevation we're at here, and you said 4,800, 5,000 feet or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, I live at 8,000 at 800 feet. And for somebody in Minnesota or Missouri or Pennsylvania or wherever to drive out, get at elevation. Only give yourself 5 or 6 days to go find them. It's insanely difficult. It is. Yep. When you do it, you realize how difficult it is. But I think we also have the responsibility, and I think you do this very well, where you still gotta work so hard to get to success because you have to show that it's possible. Mm-hmm. Like you couldn't make it, just like the people used to think you couldn't do a no-kill show. You couldn't make it if you did a never kill decade, right?
Right. Yeah.
Like, people would be like, I'm going to go listen to somebody else. And so you have to present the reality, and the reality is if you can carve out the time and do the research, you can get a little strategy, you can work around the pressure, whatever, you'll find enough success. Mm-hmm. Enough to cling on to start planning for next year, and it just tends to shake out that way.
Yeah. For me, I went through the phase I bet you a lot of your listeners go through, and I don't care what species it is. I went through this phase of enthusiasm to frustration to now resolve. I am going to figure this out. Mm-hmm. Well, in my resolve phase, I was thinking there's some gadget, some doodad, some piece of equipment that's going to give me a shortcut. And I don't care what species it is. There's really not a lot of shortcuts short of knowledge and research and learning. And after I was having all these failures, I grew up in northern Minnesota walleye fishing. That was my summer. Well, if you grow up on the Canadian border, what do you do? You walleye fish. And no matter where I went, when I moved out west, it's like, wow, I can catch walleyes pretty much with really good consistency. Why can I do that, but I can't figure out elk? Mm-hmm. Well, part of it is a walleye's got a little pea-sized brain, and an elk's got a pretty big brain, and part of that. But I started breaking down how I approach walleye fishing and said, all right, what am I doing there that could apply to elk hunting? So I knew everything about walleyes. I knew what they needed at certain times of the year, and that drove where they would go to satisfy that need. So once I knew their need, okay, spawn, all right? They're going to be in a certain place during April because it's warm, the water's warming up and they're starting to spawn. Well, that's a completely different place than they're going to be in a late summer pattern in August when they're out in deep water, because their need is food, not spawn. So I said, all right, obviously I don't know enough about elk, so I started buying every elk ecology, biology book you could find. And this was before Al Gore invented the internet. So
that's the truth, right?
Yeah. So a lot of it was going to libraries. And fortunately, where I live here in Montana, we have a really good wildlife school at Montana State University. And I could go to that library and I'm reading, what do elk need? When do they need it? And so it was at that time where I built kind of a strategy I use today. So that was 1997. So what is it, 22 years later? This is still my methodology. And it came down to breaking the elk calendar into 5 periods, identifying 4 basic needs, knowing that those 4 needs are going to change based on which calendar period I'm hunting them. And if I know what the need is, the primary need, that'll tell me where that elk is on the mountain.